just going to recap week 2 for the Raiders, of course. As everyone knows, the Ravens were defeated by the Raiders. It was, they led majority of the game. And then, there's a great clip where Gardner Minshew throws an interception. Max Crosby kind of, right before he goes out on the field for defense, gets Gardner Minshew, has a conversation, and just gives him a huge encouragement as a leader. And just to remind him, like, hey, we're a team. We've got your back. You're going to win us this game. And just giving him that vote of confidence that just because he turned the ball over doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. We still have an opportunity. And one of the things I do want to touch on before I get to the Gardner Minshew thing is we have, and I said this last week, we have a sensational defense. Drew and I were kind of texting a little bit throughout the game, and we both agree we have a top 15 defense, and I said we're inside that top 15. Our front is really good. I was really proud of how our defense have played. Antonio Pierce and Patrick Graham have this team looking so good, and it does help that we have, I think he's a senior defensive consultant, I think is his title, in Rob Ryan, who was a former defensive coordinator for the Oakland Raiders way back when. But they have this defense so well tuned. The secondary plays really well. The safeties play really well. Max Crosby just is a game wrecker. Christian Wilkins in the middle of that line, just clogging up the holes of opportunity for the team to get big run plays or whatever the case may be. This defense is legit, and I think the one thing that concerns me is if our offense can just make sure that they don't turn the ball over. I don't want to say too often, as like they're probably going to, but I can suspect that our offense will probably turn the ball over at least once, maybe twice throughout a game. That's just how it's designed with Gardner Minshew and the players that we have. And I hope that our defense just doesn't go back on the field too often to where the reason why they're giving up big plays or chunk plays or scores is because they don't get an opportunity to get any rest, and the offense that we have just 3 and out or sputters or doesn't produce a lot of results when needed to help carry the defense when it's time for the offense to do their part of it. And at first, of course, I know that Raider Nation is really what I'm noticing about Raider Nation the last few seasons, and I will say this is since we hired Josh McDaniels. I would say this is how the Raiders are. Raider Nation, I'll say specifically, since we let go of John Gruden when we had that hot start, and then we had our interim Rich Pisaccia, who helped us get into the wild card, and then when the offseason where we hired Josh McDaniel and Dave Ziegler, and that was our new regime for a minute. And I'm sure some Raider Nation would say, no, I was never on board with that. But I'll just say for the majority of Raider Nation, there was some excitement about an offensive-minded head coach, someone that came from the Patriots that's going to bring a winning culture to the team, yada, 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 yada. And also, too, we had then traded for Devontae Adams. I would say since that period, Raider Nation has been very hypercritical of the smallest of things. And my example of that is week 1, Gardner Minshew threw for the 5th most yards amongst quarterbacks in week 1, or excuse me, the 8th most yards in week 1, and he had the 5th highest quarterback rating. I think it was not quarterback rating, completion percentage. He was like 77% week 1, and I think he threw for 557 yards week 1. That was 5th and 8th best in the league amongst all starting quarterbacks. Week 2, again, he was in the top 5 in completion percentage. I think he was, I want to say like number 3, 77.5%. And then in terms of yards, he was in the top 10 again. And I say all that to say is the reason why I'm saying that Raider Nation is a little hypercritical right now is because there was literally play by play by play. We were either calling for Gardner Minshew's job or the offensive coordinator's job or the defensive coordinator's job, or we were just making very, very hypercritical remarks when we just need to let the game kind of develop, let the team kind of develop. Gardner Minshew actually did very well Week 2. Week 1 seemed rough because way too many turnovers on the offensive side of the ball, which gave the Chargers enough opportunities to outscore the Raiders. But I don't think that the Raiders are a bad team to where they lost that game because the Chargers are that good. I think the Raiders lost to the Chargers because of too many opportunities that we gave that Chargers team, who is coached by Jim Harbaugh, who's a very good coach and who is going to run the ball. They're going to, they're not going to challenge down the field too much. They're going to take the underneath stuff. And of course, like I mentioned, the Raiders being on the field far too much, or the defense, being on the field far too much in week 1 is what ultimately went into that. Week 2, we were seeing some of that in the first half where, our offense, couldn't get going on the running side. And our defense was basically stopping the Ravens to where we'd get the ball back. And a lot of it was this weird conservative play calling. And of course, Gardner Minshew trying to still figure out the Ravens defense. Because let's be honest, the Ravens defense is not just some bad defense that anyone could have a day on. They are a very good defense. The Ravens every year have a top 10 defense when they're healthy, because I know there's some seasons that they're not a top 10, and that's due to injury a lot of the times. But they are usually touted as a extremely good defensive team. Jim Harbaugh has that defense always running to the best of their abilities. And so, of course, in that game, Gardner Minshew is figuring out how this defense is working. And let's be honest, Gardner Minshew, as I've said, is a game manager. He is not a franchise quarterback. He's best on the rollouts and, improvising a little bit, and he can help get the ball down the field. But he's not someone that's going to stand in the pocket and deliver it outside the numbers like like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes, or I'll even say Joe Burrow out of there. He's just not that capable of a quarterback. But I think what's frustrating is Raider Nation as a fan group, sometimes we are just very extreme, because I think Gardner Minshew is a good enough quarterback to win us some games. And I do think he's a kind of quarterback that will lose you some games. And I said repeated times, weeks prior to this moment right now, Gardner Minshew may have been named the week 1 starter, but that does not mean that he'll remain the starting quarterback at the end of the season. And we'll see. Like, week 1's performance, not very good. We all acknowledge that. That's week 1, though. As we all know, that some teams are still working out a lot of kinks in week 1, week 2. Really, teams come to form about week 3 if you're on the early side of it. Maybe 4 or 5 is basically when your team gets into full swing with how things are going and how your team is really going to be. And I think Gardner Minshew is a player that you can rely on to manage a good game. Is he going to turn the ball over? Probably. But fortunately, we have a defense that could potentially make enough stops to where it'll negate that mistake. Now, that doesn't mean that I think Gardner Minshew is the foreseeable starting quarterback for the rest of eternity or the rest of the season. No, I think if he's having bad games where we're losing and a lot of it is the play, the turnovers, I think AOC should definitely step in there, because at least AOC showed that he can be a winning quarterback in the league, getting the support and stuff as what we saw down the stretch of the season. When we had Antonio Pierce basically take over and AOC was our starting quarterback at that time. So I think that is very possible. We have a good opportunity to get on a pretty good roll to where we are a confident football team. As I've mentioned, we have the Carolina Panthers in Las Vegas this Sunday. It's the 1:00 game. And I'll actually go over the schedule, like I mentioned, about the lines and the over, the under. So that's a winnable game. And I believe the Raiders will respect the Panthers enough to where we won't take them for granted, to where, Andy Dalton, beats us essentially. And we are then the laughingstock because we are the team that lost to the Carolina Panthers. I think that Antonio Pierce will have this team respect the Carolina Panthers enough to play them hard. I don't think they're an organized team. So I think the Raiders should win this game. But of course, I have seen it to where we should have beaten the the Los Angeles Rams when they had Baker Mayfield, who they picked up on Tuesday, started for them on Thursday, and he beat the Raiders. I've seen this movie several times where the Raiders go into a week confident because they're playing a lower team, so to speak, and that lower team ends up beating the Raiders. But I think that Antonio Pierce will have this team respecting their opponent to where that won't happen. And I do suspect that the Raiders will take care of business.
Drew Code Sports Talk is powered by StreamYard. Want to take your podcast to the next level? Use StreamYard. It's the easiest way to record, stream, or produce high-quality episodes, whether you're solo or with guests. Plus, when you sign up today, you'll get a $10 credit to get started. Use the link in our bio. Don't miss out. StreamYard is your key to seamless podcasting.
The Raiders have this great opportunity to where if they can win and become 2-1, then that gets them into Cleveland against the Browns. And, the Cleveland Browns are a very good team defensively. They're a okay team offensively. Of course, we don't trust their quarterback. And so if the Raiders can put together a nice little run, they might be 3-1 going into week 5. That would be very interesting. And again, I've said that I think the Raiders' expectations are probably like an 8-9 team or a 9-8 team, on the low side 7-10, depending on how competitive we are. And it feels like we're a very competitive team. And as Andrew would say, we're going to be a hard out. You're not just going to get an easy victory on us. It's going to take a lot out of you, and it's going to take a lot out of us. We may lose, but you won't win comfortably. It's going to be a very tough game, and the Raiders could win a lot of these games. And that's something that I would not be surprised with. If we just stay in some of these games and remain competitive, we will catch teams on bad days. And we also will just outright beat teams because I think our team is good enough to do that. I think Antonio Pierce has the Raiders looking at football in that fashion where it's now like, how bad are the Raiders going to lose? But now like, hey, the Raiders have an opportunity. And I think the rest of the league now is on notice because the Las Vegas Raiders, when they beat the Ravens, it was actually a very positive way they won. They beat them based on momentum, play calling. They were going with a game plan, which they were trying to run the ball, couldn't, ended up throwing the ball. And then play action actually played a part in them getting the go-ahead touchdown that tied the game before they ultimately were able to make some stops. And then that built their confidence. And then when they gave the ball back to protect the lead against the Ravens, rather than give up big chunk plays to where it put the Ravens in field goal position or even scored them a touchdown, which they would have done in years past, their defense actually stood firm and played sound defensive football. So that way that could not have happened. And that tells me what Antonio Pierce has already taken the Raiders to, which there was a very hard win, a very Raiders-like win. And it was and I say this to mean a very mature win. Like, it's not the Raiders where they get a lead, they lose the lead in the last second because they can't play defense. They actually were able to protect the lead and put a lot of pressure on the Ravens to where they could not overcome that momentum and overcome the Raiders taking the lead, and that defense now putting enormous pressure on them to score, and the Ravens couldn't do that. So I think that's fantastic, and I can see the Raiders doing that. But I also, again, for Raider Nation, let's also bring it back a little bit. Each week, the Raiders are going to break your heart, whether it's a play call, a turnover, whatever it might be. Just have to remember that football is played over 4 quarters. The season is 18 weeks with a bye week in there. And we're not going to be a Super Bowl team tomorrow. But we can take small steps to build the foundation, the know-how to become that good of a team if we all just buy in and we believe in this team. Hyperbolic comments or reactions are not going to be it. And if anyone's been a Raider fan for that long, which I believe Raider Nation is, I mean, I've been one since I was a preteen, and I've seen the Raiders be really high, and I've been through the Raiders when they were very, very low, when they were literally the laughing stock in the league. And now the last, I'd say 7-8 years, there's been some respectability on the Raiders, and we're still on this roller coaster where we're good, we're not good, we're good, we're not good. And I feel like that this is an opportunity for us to get on the right side of like being a formidable team. But it is going to take us as fans to acknowledge that there's going to be growing pains. There's going to be bad plays. There's going to be bad games where we lost because of this and because of that. But to not be calling for a head coach's job, an OC's job, a DC's job until like, okay, yeah, we can't do this any longer. And that's what I'll say. That's my big soapbox thing and all that stuff. And so preview to week 3, like I'd mentioned, I think the Raiders are going to take care of business against Carolina. I'm pretty confident in that, but I'm also really happy to see what the Raiders do on the next following weeks to see if we can put some momentum and all that energy, because Raiders are right there. Let's see if that they can continue to build on this opportunity. So